What's going on, guys? Welcome to In the Zone. I'm your host, Garrison Roy, and today we're going to be in a different zone than what we're normally in. But before I get into that, if you're new to the podcast, right, we have different segments where we have rants, where I just kind of go on and have, hot topics that are discussed or call out some BS in the industry and really just kind of vent on certain things. Then I have mental minutes, those quick mental game hacks to help elevate your performance, deep dive educational explorations with the small intricacies of either skill acquisition, training zones, or for today, we're going to be going into the finance zone. So we'll be really looking forward to that. But if you have any other questions, topics, or suggestions, feel free to email that into inthezonepodcast123 at gmail.com. But without further ado, I want to welcome on Jacob Turner, the founder of Moment Private Wealth. What's going on?
Garrison, thanks for having me, man. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Oh, absolutely. I've been following you along for really kind of longer than I even realized, right? Oh, just being a Cardinals fan and then seeing you guys play against the Tigers. I'm like, oh, okay. And then eventually followed you on LinkedIn and X, and I'm like, all right, cool. So this guy kind of made a complete pivot from his baseball career to now kind of being in the financial industry. So kind of talk to us a little bit of your story and how that kind of evolved to where you are now.
Yeah, well, I think to give people context and to make it make sense, so to speak, I'll go back a little bit. I'll be quick about this, so don't worry. But I mean, I grew up like any little boy, right? Like I love baseball. I said like I want to become a professional baseball player. At the time, I didn't know how realistic that was or wasn't, but ended up having a lot of God-given ability. So went on to play professional baseball for about 11 years, and through that time, was blessed to sign for a lot of money out of high school. So the financial component around business and baseball was really always there for me. And I knew when I got done, like I wanted to do something around money and sports and finance. I wasn't 100% sure what it was going to look like. I stopped playing in 2019. I essentially went and worked for free for a year to really see like, is this the industry that I really want to be in? And then after that, launched my own firm at the beginning of 2021, which is Moment Private Wealth, where we help professional athletes and high growth entrepreneurs navigate a lot of the same complexities that I did.
Love it. That's awesome. And to, I guess, kind of unpack that a little bit more, right? And I listened to some of your story even before coming on, where there is a lot of kind of anxiety and the unknown when you get signed really big bucks, or nowadays guys get a lot of money thrown at them through NIL deals in college, right? It's like, hey, what do I do with this money? I don't want to blow it all on, just silly things or going to bars and things like that. Like I got to be smart with this, and what was that like for you? And did that experience that you have kind of spark that whole moment, or
Yeah.
the right, the part where you're going
Yeah.
into?
Well, I think I really break it down into like three different categories. So the first category is like it's really hard to figure out who to trust, right? Like this is something completely new for you. You know, as a baseball player, the stages is like you find a college and it's hard to figure out like, hey, are these coaches legit? Like, are they going to be there for me when I'm there? Do I want to play for them? Are they just rolling out the red carpet? Or like when I get there, is this what it's actually going to be like? You know, the second stage is for me, it was like selecting an agent. And then after that, it was like choosing a financial advisor. And all those decisions were really hard because they were decisions I'd never made before. So that's the first part I think that's really hard for guys, whether it's NIL or professional baseball. Like it's hard to navigate the people side of it. And then the middle side is like the life side. Like you make all this money, whether it's an NAL and you're making 50, 100 grand as an 18 or 19-year-old, that's a lot of money, right? You can do a lot of things with that. So how do you balance what you should be spending and enjoying versus what you should be saving for the future, right? In my scenario, I signed for millions of dollars. And I think I went so far on one side and said, like, man, I don't want to spend any of this because I was worried I was going to lose it all and be on 30 for 30 broke. And I think there's a balance there, right? Of enjoying the work that you've put in, enjoying the fruits of your success, but then also being smart about saving it. And then I think the last part is really the strategies and tactics behind it. Like, what should I be thinking about as a professional athlete in my situation? What are the tax strategies I should be thinking about? How should I be thinking about investing? Like, I'm reading all these little bits and pieces online, but they don't really flow together and they definitely don't tie to me in my life. But
Mhm.
this one sounds good and that one sounds good. So it's kind of three-headed monster of figuring out the people side, the life side, and then also the advice side. Like what strategies am I actually going to implement?
Oh, absolutely. And you can hear a lot of, I'm sure you had a lot of people giving you advice for like, hey, you should do this, you should do this. It was like trying to sift through all of that and having one resounding voice to kind of go to versus trying to sift through all these different things. Or even nowadays, I'm sure some guys are, you know, going on Google, TikTok, Instagram, whatever it might be, and they're just like, oh, hey, I can do crypto, or I can do this, or I can do this. And it can be very overwhelming, to
Yeah.
be honest, right? So
No,
it's
100%. I think even now today, like guys are better educated than they've ever been because there's so much stuff online. But then on the flip side of it, the challenge becomes what do you listen to and what do you not listen to? Because the way I describe it is like social media is full of great information, but it's also full of a lot of half truths where somebody's not giving the information with the intent of lying to you, but they're also not telling you the whole truth. And I'll give you an example. Like I see all the time stuff about real estate and how it's super tax advantage. True, but there's also a lot of things that go along with that in order to actually implement that to like its fullest effect. And oftentimes, whether it's a thread on Twitter or a post on LinkedIn or a clip on Instagram, it doesn't really dive into every single aspect of it. So, you as a consumer is looking at it and thinking, man, this is a great idea. Like, I should try this. And it doesn't mean it's good or bad, but you need to understand all the details behind it before you actually try to implement it.
Oh, for sure. It's like, hey, like I'm going to invest in having a bunch of Airbnbs, for example, right?
Yep.
It's like, hey, there's a lot of other fees and there's people that stay there, damages that happen that people don't tell you about. That you just see the nice little thread on X or LinkedIn and you're like, oh, make X amount of money for, you know, X amount of years for this many properties. And you're like, sounds really cool. But in reality, if
Well,
you're
we
trying to play professional baseball, you can't manage all that. And
Yeah. We were talking before the show about a fellow entrepreneur that we both enjoy, Andy Frisella. And I think one
oh,
of the
yeah.
things I appreciate about Andy is the fact that like he shoots business how it really is. Right. I
Mhm.
think a lot of people are glorifying entrepreneurship and business and sports and investing and real estate and all this stuff. It can all be great. But the reality of the situation is like it all takes work. So if you're looking at something and you're saying, man, like that seems too good to be true, it probably is because chances are that person's putting in a ton of work behind the scenes to get to wherever they're at and whatever stage it is.
Oh, absolutely. And he definitely does shoot it straight where he's just to the point and like, hey, this is gonna suck. If you want to be an entrepreneur, like it's not gonna be all sunshine and rainbows like what you're seeing on the internet. It's gonna be a grind. And he even admits, like, hey, there's gonna be days where you're gonna want to quit
Yep.
just flat out. And like, yep, I can relate. I can definitely relate to that. So um yeah, it's definitely a different mindset to have someone go from shooting it straight to you, and especially being whether it's a well-off, you know, player or maybe even a guy who's, the middle of the pack college baseball player, like, hey, I'm getting ready to transition into the real world. Like, okay,
Hmm.
now what do I do? Right. And
Yep.
I think that was really scary for me too, to be honest. I was like, hey, like I want to still be in baseball, still want to train, still want to be around the game. But being in that uh, you know, decision of like, hey, should I even do a real life job, quote unquote,
Yep.
or, and there's, pros and cons to that where you can have that, or, chase a dream that you've always wanted. And sometimes, at the end of the day, I even tell this to all the players I train, at the end of the day, we all have to hang up the cleats and become beer league softball players. So whether or not it's, after pitching machine T-ball or after, 11 years in the bigs like yourself. So,
Yeah. Well, at some point, everybody's going to have the jaws of life staring them in the face, whether you are an athlete or not, right? Like you get done with high school and maybe you go into college. If you don't go into college, like right then, the jaws of life are staring you in the face. You go to college, like at some point after those 4 years, like the jaws of life are staring you in the face. And I think so much of it is learning from our own life experiences and being prepared and understanding that like it's not going to come easy, right? Like you look at anybody that's successful and you ask them about their path and they'll like kind of give you the surfacey answer. And then if you just keep asking questions, you'll realize, man, they went through a lot to get to where they're at. And I'm only seeing the tip of the iceberg 10, 20 years down the road. And I want that, but am I willing to do everything else that comes along with it? I'll never forget the story that an entrepreneur that we worked with in our business told me. He just built this big house and they were throwing this housewarming party. And he's like, I had this young kid. He just graduated college. He came up to me and he's like, man, your house is awesome. Like, what do you do? Almost like one of those YouTube videos, right? Is how I'm picturing this in my mind. And he's like, I'm an entrepreneur. I own this business. This is what we do, et cetera, et cetera. And he's like, well, I want to do that. I just remember him telling me afterwards, he's like, I didn't have the heart to tell him, but I wanted to ask him, like, do you really want to do this? Because, this guy is almost 50 years old. He'd been doing it a long time. And
Mhm.
this kid had no idea the trials and tribulations that this individual had went through to get to the stage that he was at. And it's not to say you shouldn't do it. You just should go in with realistic expectations to understand what it actually takes to get to whatever level you want to get to, whether that's sports, business, life, etc.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, it's like you said, you have to have a little bit of that taste of, oh, hey, this is what it really is going to be like. And I kind of even had that whenever I was learning how to coach and, working for free down at Cressy Sports Performance in Florida. And I was around a lot of the big league guys and I was hearing some of their stories and I'm kind of like, man, I wanted to be in these guys' positions. These guys are, complaining about arm pain and stuff all the time. And that's actually where I started to learn a little bit more about, service time and things like that too. So I was like, oh, wow, okay, there's a whole lot more that I didn't even know about, right? Like a lot of guys would say, hey, I want to play in the big leagues. And they think of the signing bonus and the big contract, and they think they're set for life. But
Mm-hmm.
obviously, we both know that's not the case.
Oh yeah. I can't tell you how many guys I've played with. And I think I fell into this trap a little bit too. Like when you first get called up or you're in the minor leagues and you're a top prospect with the organization, you have this false sense of reality that like, well, it's just always going to be like this. Like I remember my first big league spring training. I'm like the 18-year-old top prospect. And I remember we're playing golf with some of the other younger guys. One of the guys was like on the verge of making the team. It looked like he was going to make it. And we were having this conversation about him like buying a house at the spring training facility. Cause he's like, I'm going to be here a while. So like, it'd be great to like be settled here, yada, yada. Right. All stories that like anybody that's been around professional sports has heard. 11 years later, what I can tell you is like the chances of that person being in the same location 3 years later with the same team in the same situation is so low, right?
Yeah.
Like I grew up a Cardinals fan and I think we got spoiled, right? Like Adam Wainwright was here, I don't know, 19 years. Yadier Molina was here 15 plus years. Pujols was here 10 plus years and then came back. Like that is not a normal circumstance for a professional
No, not at
baseball
all.
player, right? It's like you're in and out and I think it goes back to like what we talked about before. Like to get to the level that you want to get to, you need to understand everything else that comes with it. And that's not to discourage anybody. That's just to understand, like, man, it takes a lot of work not only to get there, but then you got to keep your foot on the gas in order to stay there.
Hmm. Oh, yeah. Just getting there isn't the, if you feel like you arrived when you get there, you're already on the downfall. Come back down, right? You're
Oh,
like, keep
100%.
going, keep pressing, right? You can't let up. And, do you think that even applies to not only just real life, but like in more of the finance setting where you're just like, hey, I met my goal to get X amount of dollars in this type of account or savings account or
Yep.
retirement account. Like, is there a point where you just are like, hey, I'm good? Or do you keep pushing and seeing like how, and I guess it might depend on the guy's goals or what they're trying to achieve, right? But kind of
Yeah.
curious if that parallels over to you guys.
Well, I see it as being there's a lot of value in having a healthy fear that it could all go away tomorrow in a
Mm.
lot of things in life. And I would say with baseball, that was one of the things that it definitely gave me. Like it's given me this really healthy fear that no matter what I have, like it could all go away tomorrow. And it helps me keep my foot on the gas. Where I really think it helps a lot in finances when it comes to risk, right? Like people think about risk in all different ways, but how I think about risk is this. Once you account for every single thing in your life, you've accounted for everything, you've thought about it, you're like, man, here's all the different outcomes that could happen. What's left over after that is risk, right? Because risk is often this unforeseen event. In finance, if you look at some of the biggest risk events in the past 2 decades, right? You think of like the financial crisis in 2009, you think of the dot-com bubble in 2000, you think of COVID in 2021. Nobody was thinking that those things were going to happen. Like nobody accounted for those when they went into like their risk factor and they said like, what could happen? And that's where I think in finance, it really does come into play because you want to make sure that like you have this healthy fear that you're being cognizant of like, how much risk should I take versus what should I be putting away versus how much should I be saving for the future, where you have a healthy dose of like saying it could all go away if I'm not being smart with it.
Yeah, no, it's very true. And I mean, even nowadays, as high as, injury rates and things are going like that, everyone has their own opinions, but you kind of do have to plan for the future. And especially for, I was talking with one guy who I don't even know if he plays anymore. It was Logan Morrison, but he was like, "Hey, um, I don't have I like have a GED, don't have any college degree to go back on. I need to try to make as much money as I can right now while I can. And I
Yep.
was like, yep, that makes total sense because I got the degree, but you're basically starting back from square one once you're done playing. Like it's, and a lot of guys can negotiate that in their contracts and stuff too. But no, it's so, so true. Um,
Yeah.
whether it's on the
Well,
playing side or finance side or anything.
and then I think you compound it with the fact that like it's really hard as like a 30-year-old to go back and start over again, especially when you've been at a relatively elite level. Like if you get to professional
Oh
baseball
yeah.
at all, even in the minor leagues, like you're at a pretty elite level. Like generally, there's some level of ego there that starts to come into play. Like, hey, I've kind of made it. Like I'm a big deal. And I'm gonna
Yeah.
tell you right now, when you get done with baseball and the jaws of life are staring you in the face, like it can be really humbling. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of guys struggle with, where they try to hang on, in my opinion, too long. They play the extra 2, 3, 4 years, and it's not even because they really want to. If you really asked them and you really got down to the core of why they're still doing it, they're doing it out of fear that like I don't have anything else lined up, and this is the only thing I know. And look, I get it, but at the same time, I think Garrison, it goes back to your point, like we talk about it like it could all go away tomorrow. Well, how can we plan for that? How can we plan for the fact that like at some point, like we talked about at the beginning of this, that baseball is going to end for everybody? And I think if we go in with that mindset, it doesn't mean we're thinking about it on a daily basis. Like we're still being optimistic that we're going to reach every height we want to reach.
Yeah.
But let's also be realistic. Like Chipper Jones is a Hall of Famer. He played 15 years with the Braves. Baseball's over for him, right? If you would have thought like when you start out, like what are some little baby steps I could be doing maybe in the off season, conversations I could be having, things I could be thinking about to just slowly start positioning myself for life after baseball.
Yeah. No, it's a great point too, because and I don't know if it was you that said this or maybe I was reading it in another thread where it's like, hey, you're gonna be an ex-baseball player longer than you're gonna be a baseball player. I was like,
100%.
oof, that kind of hits
I
home
think
for
that's what so the play MLB Players Union comes in and speaks every spring training. And I think that's like the one thing that like I think I heard it every single year. You're going to be a former player a lot longer than you're going to be a current player every year. And for the first half of my career, it's like, yeah, that's nice, but that's for somebody else. That message is not for me.
right. Yeah.
And then for the last half of my career, I was like, man, that message is for me. Like I need to either kick it in gear with what I'm doing here or figure out what I'm doing outside of this.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And even, kind of to your point where it's like, hey, you were there for the first couple of years. You may not have been there again. And then, you don't hit those milestones of service time. And you're like, crap, now I really have to do something in order
Yep.
to piece all of this together, you know. But it is good to kind of take a step back, zoom out a little bit, get out of your comfort zone, I guess, right? Because there is a level of arrogance, and even myself as a coach was like, hey, I'm going to do this forever. Well, odds are like I can't demonstrate exercises when I'm 75.
Yeah.
So I have to kind of think and zoom out a little bit more for that aspect too. But it's something to really just kind of ponder on a little bit and be like, okay, hey, like what does really matter to me? Is it the legacy that I'm going to leave a family, or is it, you know, maybe being able to retire comfortably? Everyone could have their own type of end goal, right?
Yeah.
And I think we alluded to this earlier, but having that one person that you can go to is huge because
Yeah.
whether it's in your baseball industry to transitioning out of baseball to, you know, even just at life in general, right? Like having that person that you can kind of go to and rely on is it can make a lot of a difference.
Well, I think it goes back to one of the things that I personally could have done a better job of when I was playing. And I think this is true for anybody, like whether you're an athlete or not, like I think you should listen to this is whatever stage you're at. There's so many little things, little tiny steps you could take to put yourself in the best position so that whatever happens next, whatever door opens, you're like, man, like I've already been cracking that door open. I can walk right through it. As opposed to like, I'm gonna have to build that door, then open the door, then walk through the door. Right. And I think whatever stage you're at, whether you're a high schooler and you have no idea what the future looks like, whether you're a college kid and you're like, man, baseball is going to end soon. And I got this degree in business, but I have no idea what that means. And it could go a million different directions. Like
Yeah.
let's just focus on today. Like, what are the little baby steps I could take? What's the conversation with somebody that's successful in my life that might lead to something in the future? What's the conversation I could have with a mentor, a coach, a teacher to understand, like, hey, I really like what you're doing. Like, how'd you get to the stage that you're at? And a lot of times you're going to realize that, like, you're going to see all these different dots out there and you're going to wonder, like, how do these things all connect back to each other? And then you're going to be able to look back in a decade and be like, man, I'm really glad I did that. Like, I see how that dot connected to that dot. And like, it wasn't this linear path, but like when I tie all these things together, it really put me right where I need to be.
Oh yeah. And it's even just kind of looking back from my life. I'm like, wow, okay. It wasn't this straight linear path. There was a lot of things
Yeah.
that led up to where I was, whether that's with, baseball or even just getting out here into the Charlotte, North Carolina area is like, hey, it wasn't go from point A to point B. It was point A to B to Z to A B B, right? Like there's so
Yeah.
many other routes that you could get to, but inevitably all those choices lead down to where you are now, right? And if I'm coaching an athlete and I'm like, hey, if you don't like where you are, let's do something about it, right?
Yeah.
Don't accept and be like, hey, oh well, these are the cards that I've been dealt for my life, and taking on that victim mentality. And I talk about that a lot. And the mental mindset pieces is like, hey, you gotta overcome some of these things, right? Whether it's maybe you were dealt a bad hand, but hey, what are you gonna do about it now? Or oh, hey, yeah, maybe you were not in that day and age where everybody was getting NIL deals and getting paid to play college baseball, and you took on a lot of debt to go to play college baseball. All right, well, are you saving? Are you chipping away at that big thing that's, continuing to compound? Or are you just going to let it sit there and continue to grow and basically really put a heavy weight on you, I think, and, having debt can put a lot of pressure on guys for sure. Even if they are in that position or maybe a former big leaguer, they bite off too much than they can chew, and then they're like, "Oh crap, I have all these expenses now that I have to deal with."
Yeah. Well, I think too often everybody in life, we look back rather than looking forward and just taking where we're at, like being present with where we're at, where our feet are, understanding whatever cards we've been dealt in the past, whatever decisions we've made, like how do we move forward from here? And I think oftentimes the biggest issue that people run into, and this is true in finance, and this is true in life, and this is true in sports, is we have this big goal. And realistically, the goal is further away than we think it is. And it's going to take more work to get there than we think it is. And we're so overwhelmed by the fact that, like, if I sat there and I was like, Garrison, well, I know you want to be a big leaguer, man. It's going to take you 5 years. 5 years of showing up at this facility every day in training. 5 years. You want to do it? But at the end, the reward's going to be you're going to be a big leaguer. You're like, okay, I think I want to do it. All right, what are we going to do today? Right? Like, how do we backtrack that? I think that's where people get caught up. They see, like, they want success, right? They want to be financially free. And they're like, okay, well, it's going to take a decade. You want to do it for a decade? And if you're not willing to do it for a decade, like, don't even start. Don't say you are and then you're not. But it's also backtracking it to, like, what am I going to do today? What is the step that I can do today? And I think even like the story I would share from a baseball perspective with this was, and I posted about this here recently, was I think the best question to ask anybody in life, if you want to see if they're going to be successful, is are you all in? Like, are you all in on what you're doing? And they're going to probably say, yeah. And they're going to be like, okay, so give me an example. Like, when you say you're all in, what do you mean? Like, give me an example of you being all in. And the reason why I say that is I think most people aren't really all in. When I got done playing baseball, my last year, 2019, I go to South Korea, I play overseas, made good money, was trying out some different things pitching wise to see if I could try to get better results on the mound. Came back, didn't have the results I wanted, but still had some opportunity to continue playing. And I think a lot of times people struggle with, like, well, when do I know if I should move on from whatever's next, whether that's sports or business or life, right? And for me, it just came down to, like, was I all in? Was I all in on showing up and doing all my weighted ball throws before I played catch? Was I all in on, like, doing all my hip mobility stuff before I played catch? Was I all in on doing my shoulder program after I got done throwing a bullpen? Not was I all in on, like, performing when the lights were on and there was 10, 15, 20, 30, 40,000 people there. Like, was I all in on, like, doing the tedious stuff on Monday when nobody knew I was doing it? And for me, the answer was pretty simple. Like, I'm just not all in anymore. And if I'm not all in, like I'm not going to give myself even a chance to succeed. So I think that's a question that like I would just encourage everybody to ask themselves, like whatever you're doing in life, like are you all in? Like are you really all in? And be real with yourself. Like give yourself real life examples of like tell me how you were all in.
Wow. No, yeah. I definitely can attest to that. That's a great question to ask yourself. And one thing that I even just coaching around various settings, that's the biggest thing that I could see a difference between a pro and an amateur guy or even guys, still in high school. But if they're around those guys and they're training around them, they realize, oh wow, okay, hey, being you saying all in, but you're being present, you're in that moment, you're being very meticulous, you're asking questions like, hey, am I doing this right? Being willing to ask for help. The pro guys are more attuned to that than, you know, anyone else, I think, or even any guy who goes far in baseball. Like they take their warm-ups very seriously. They take up every single rep, every single throw, as if, you say it as if it's their last, but like they're zoned in, right? Not to
Yeah.
be kind of putting that in the zone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You're locked in, you are ready to rock and roll no matter what day it is. You're planning, you're going to execute it.
Yeah. Well, think about it like here's the analogy I would use. Let's say we're building a house and we're building a bunch of bricks. And our end goal is when we build this house, we want to invite all of our family and friends over and we want to just show off like how look at how cool this house is I built.
Yeah.
And if we're halfway through building the bricks and we're halfway up and we're like, you know what? Like I don't really feel like putting on the plaster the right way for these couple of bricks. Like we'll just kind of put them on there. And then like when we get to the top though, like I'm gonna do the finishing. It's gonna look really nice when I finish it. And then people come over and they're like, what happened in the middle of the house? I think that's all the tedious stuff that we're doing on a daily basis. And the analogy there is like the performance that we have at the end, like as an athlete, the performance we have on the field is it's what we all want, right? Like that's the really
Yeah.
fun part. But you're not going to give yourself a chance to succeed if you don't do all the other stuff. And the other thing I would say is like one of the things that I struggled with was I'd be like, man, like I'm doing everything I need to do and I'm still not having success. And kind of like this victim mentality. And one thing I
Mm.
realized was like, just because I was doing everything that I was supposed to be doing didn't mean that I was going to have success. It meant that I was going to give myself the best chance of success. And I think that was like this big realization for me because, it's easy as an athlete to compare, you're in the weight room with other guys. And you're like, man, well, I'm working harder than that guy and he's
Yeah.
having more success. But again, we go back to what we talked about earlier. Like the cards that you're dealt may be different than the cards that he's dealt. And just because you work hard doesn't mean that like you're entitled to some level of success. You're entitled to a chance at it, but it doesn't mean that like you're entitled to success just because you put in the work.
Yep. Oh, that's very well said. I mean, there's not many things in life that you just put in the work and then all of a sudden, like, you're gonna absolutely succeed in, right? Maybe even in any portfolios, like, hey, you put in the money, you're not always gonna get that guaranteed win rate,
Yep.
right? Like,
Yeah.
or gambling in anything, it's like, hey, sometimes you're at the right place at the right time and it skyrockets, or sometimes those cards don't fall in your favor, and you
Yeah. I
just
heard a
gotta
I
go
heard a
ahead.
great line the other day from an entrepreneur, Scott Galloway, who has had a ton of success as an entrepreneur. He's made a few $100 million. And he had this line where he's like, you want to always keep your sales up. I just thought it was like an incredible line. And his idea there was like, whenever you're down and like things aren't going your way, it's like, just keep your sales up because you want to make sure that whenever that next gust of wind comes, you'll be able to catch it. I was like, man, what an incredible thought. Like, because we've all been there, right? Like, no matter how much success you've had or how much failure you've had the times when like, man, you're down, the sales are down, and
Mhm.
then you're like, oh shoot, like there was an opportunity right there and I just missed it.
Yeah.
And rather than just being like, I understand that like even my success in business outside of sports is not going to be linear. I look back over 3 years, I'm really grateful for where we're at. But there wasn't a ton of times during the last 3 years I was like, well, there's success for you right there. Like that's what it looks like right there. It was like
Yeah.
there was wins along the way, but there's been tons of losses too.
Mhm. Oh yeah. Well, you can't expect to win every single day. It's just kind of a very facetious thought to be like, oh, hey, every single day I step out on the field, I'm going to win. You
Yep.
should have that mindset, right? Like there's a difference between having that mindset and having the confidence to go do that. But thinking that that's it, you're just going to run over everyone that comes in, it's almost kind of naive to think that you're going to go out there. win every pitch, win every game that you're going to be in, or win every single, you know, uh, transaction that you're going to go for, every single sale or every single person that you try to reach out to, or,
Hmm.
or like, hey, I'm trying to get someone on a podcast. Like, hey, some of you guys don't know, I've taken a lot of L's trying to reach out to people,
Oh
and
yeah.
I just keep rolling with it. It's just
Yeah.
what you do.
Yeah. I think it goes back to like a good piece of advice I got when I was playing. Everybody always say, stick to the process, stick to the process. And for the
Mhm.
longest time, I'm like, what do they mean? Stick to the process. Like, what do they, I don't understand what they're talking about. And one of the guys I played with articulated it really well to me. He was just like, the reason why I say stick to my process is because I know that I'm not always going to have success. But what I can do is I can control the things that are inside of my control. And by doing that, it's going to give me the most amount of confidence when I go out there to have a chance at success. And he's like, so then whether I give up 6 runs or I go a complete game shutout, it doesn't really matter because I know that over the next 4 days as a starting pitcher, I'm going to do the same things. And on the fifth day, I'm going to show up the same way with the same level of confidence, or hopefully a little bit more confidence. I'm going to go out there and give myself the best chance to perform. And that's where I do think like sticking to your process, whatever that is so valuable because then you can also go back and say, hey, if I've done this 3, 4, 5, 6 times in a row and it's still not working,
Mhm.
maybe I need to tweak the process, as opposed to oftentimes we change stuff so fast. Something doesn't happen right away and you're like, oh, it's not working. I'm just going to, and it's like this analogy of the ice cube melting, right? Ice cube melts at like 33 degrees, but like at 31 degrees, you're like, nothing's happening. Nothing's happening, right? Like it's not getting hot enough in here. But then when it does melt, you're like, oh, it's impossible to ignore. And I think that's the challenge that everybody faces in life.
Yeah, or I think of that graphic that all the guys are like mining for diamonds, and one of them stops like just short, and then the other one's
Oh yeah.
going. I'm like, oh yeah, that's so true, and so many things in life. Um, well, Jacob, one question I had for you, obviously, since you've had a lot of experience in the big leagues, do you have a point in time or maybe one game that you realized, wow, I'm like so zoned in right now. I'm just like everything else, the people in the stands and everything else is just a blur, but you were kind of like the movie For the Love of the Game where, Kevin Costner was like, clear the mechanism, and it just all
Yeah.
everything disappears around you. Was it like that for you every outing, or was there like maybe one outing that you had you were just like, yeah, that one right there, that was it.
I would say my big league debut was probably the time when I felt like I had the clearest focus I'd ever had. For
Yeah.
whatever reason, like I couldn't tell you anything else that really even happened. Like from the time I threw the first strike, right? Like before the game, nerves are there. Like pitch one, strike. It's like, okay, it's baseball. Like, but I'm like, man, I want to do good. Like I'm really focused. And I just remember having like this laser level of focus.
Yeah.
On the flip side of that, I can remember later on in my career when I was going through some struggles, I can remember this one game. I think we were playing in Atlanta and they had a decent crowd there, not huge, but decent crowd. And I felt like I could hear every guy in the 12th row. Right. And I'm like, man, like this is not the level of focus that I need at this stage. Right. Like, and it was always hard for me to determine like how do I get to, people talk about the zone and it's definitely a thing. Like you get in the zone and like you don't hear anything. Like
Yeah.
nobody's around you. I remember the first time I pitched at Busch Stadium. I'm from St. Louis, so pitching at Busch Stadium was super cool for me. Before the game, I went over to some family's house and they're all sitting by the pool and we're just kind of like hanging out, eating lunch. And I remember one of the family members was like, is he like not focused for the game? My wife was like, no, he's fine. Like he's gonna go pitch tonight and like he'll be fine. And the thing was like I was pitching so well that I'm like, this is just like what I do. Like in 2 hours, I'll just turn it on and like I'll be really focused. And I remember just being really focused and like pitching and it was fun and enjoyable. But then, like I said, on the flip side, I've had games where I'm like, man, that guy in row 12, CJ, just cannot shut up. And I'm hearing every word he's saying.
Yeah. Just hearing that. Oh man. All the all the smack talk, and you're just like, okay, I gotta figure out how to get past that.
Oh,
Or
yeah.
they say something and you just start dying laughing. You gotta cover your mouth and you're
Oh,
just like,
yeah.
well, heard that one. I love it. I love it. Well, Jacob, I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time to do this. But before I let you go, what are some of the like last closing remarks for anyone who's listening to this, whether it's a player at let's say college or professional level, what would they need to do to maximize their, uh, the income that they're getting, or maybe even just like we touched on a lot of it as far as just general in life, but what are some of those things that you think would be an inflection point for them to make that pivot?
Yeah, I think from a financial side, like lean on people around you, find good people, find people that you can trust, find people that can educate you first and foremost. Like you should understand what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Sure.
From a life baseball side, what I would say is like the biggest separator for guys is the quicker guys have success is often the guys that realize they belong. They belong in whatever room they're in. We glorify, when I was in high school, I glorified college baseball. And I thought, man, like if I could play college baseball, and then you get to the minor leagues, and you're like, man, if I could get to double A, then every time you get there, you realize like, oh, they're just like me. Oh, if I could get to the big leagues, and you see all these guys you're playing with now that you saw on TV, and then you realize like they're just like me. And the guys that have success the fastest and the longest just believe that they belong in the room. So that's what I would tell guys out there today.
Oh, wow. I love it. I love it. Well, again, thanks for coming on, Jacob. And for those of you listening, stay in the zone.